just because you might be a meditator or practice yoga or go to wonderful, uplifting, transformational conferences or attend summits like this, sponsored by Sounds True with all its amazing offerings, this still might be true for you. And I have found in my work with parents who identify themselves as being on some sort of spiritual or transformational path that there can be kind of a dark underbelly of shame that if people saw me, you know, if people only knew, you might even be a teacher or a therapist and still have these episodes or these experiences with your own children that bring tremendous remorse, guilt, discomfort.
Welcome, my friends. I'm thrilled to have Susan Stiffelman with us today to explore parenting after trauma. In this session, you will learn how parents can forge loving attachment with their children, even if they did not experience it growing up, how to move through the residue of early childhood stress, and to create an empowering narrative for healing. Susan Stiffelman, MFT, is a marriage and family therapist, a teacher, and the author of Parenting Without Power Struggles and Parenting with Presence. For over 40 years, Susan has worked with families to create greater harmony and deeper connection between parents and children. A very grateful welcome, Susan. I'm so happy to have you with us today.
And I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Jeffrey. And welcome everyone to this session. Parenting can be a path of profound growth and transformation. It can bring so much joy and lightness and love into our lives. But sometimes we find ourselves behaving in ways that are very much out of integrity or out of sync with who we want to be. And we can rage and yell and withhold and run away and have all kinds of feelings rise up inside ourselves in the context of day-to-day interactions with our children. By exploring the effect of early trauma in our own childhoods, we can actually use these challenging experiences with our kids as opportunities for deep healing and growth. So it's all good, even though it can be a bumpy ride. And I would like to just share some thoughts with you about some of the context that might help explain why there sometimes seems to be another version of ourselves that shows up as we're making breakfast for our kids or helping them with their homework. And so let's talk about how we can move toward greater responsiveness and attunement with our children, even if we ourselves didn't experience that in our own childhood. We love our kids. We want to do the best by them. We often take solemn vows when our child is born. I will not repeat to my kid, this beautiful angel, this miracle, what I experienced. And yet, in those moments when our back's against the wall, when lots of dark, unexplored feelings begin to emerge, we can do the very thing that we promised ourselves we wouldn't. And so it can cause us a lot of pain. There we are yelling or shaming or scolding or comparing one child to another, threatening, bribing, sending a child to their room. And by the way, just because you might be a meditator or practice yoga or go to wonderful, uplifting, transformational conferences or attend summits like this, sponsored by Sounds True with all its amazing offerings, this still might be true for you. And I have found in my work with parents who identify themselves as being on some sort of spiritual or transformational path that there can be kind of a dark underbelly of shame that if people saw me, if people only knew, you might even be a teacher or a therapist and still have these episodes or these experiences with your own children that bring tremendous remorse, guilt, discomfort. So I want to talk about how we can reframe what's going on and use those very uncomfortable moments as opportunities for our own growth and our own healing. So it starts with attachment, and I like the model of Mary Ainsworth, and of course, Dr. Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson are using this wonderfully in their work, where we look at the ways that a child can be in an attached relationship with the parent. So the model consists of 4 attachment styles, and I'm not going to go into this in great depth, but the first, of course, is the secure attachment. This is the one we all aspire to. So this is the parent who's mentally and emotionally present with their child. When meeting their needs, they express love, discipline, arguing, laughing. There's a connection. The parent has positive intentions of love and caring and affection, and the child picks up on that. And this person eventually becomes, comfortable with intimacy and closeness. They're not preoccupied with the state of a relationship or rejection. And the child has that sense of being responded to rather than reacted to. So there's a sense of safety. They talk about the S's, the safe, soothed, seen, and secure. So this is the thing that, in a perfect world, if there was such a thing, which I don't think there is, but this is what we aim for. And the beauty is that we don't have to be that all the time with our children. We don't have to always be in this place of serene, even-tempered, secure attachment for things to be okay. Good enough is good enough, I always say. The next type of attachment, which of course many of us have experienced, is the ambivalent anxious attachment. And this is the parent who approaches a child's need for food, like the child, let's say, is crying, is hungry, and the parent sometimes attends to that, sometimes feels overwhelmed by the child's needs or demands, might approach the child with a lot of anxiety. What do I do? I don't know. Is she hungry? Is she thirsty? Is it her diaper? So there's a lot of associated anxiety around this. And sometimes also there's a disconnection where the parent isn't reliably present in a way that would ensure or establish a sense of calm and security in the child. The child who grows up, having experienced this type of attachment with the parent might crave closeness and intimacy, might be very insecure in their adult relationships, depending, of course, on the degree. The third type of attachment is the avoidant attachment. Now, this is a parent who isn't really very present in their skin. There's a lot of cerebral activity, a lot of mental goings on, but a sort of emotional detachment. And because of that, the child doesn't have that sense to that sea of feeling inside themselves. They didn't experience their caregivers exposing them to that part of the world, so it doesn't really exist. And these individuals can grow up kind of uncomfortable with closeness and dependency. They value their independence a lot and their freedom. And then finally, there's disorganized attachment, which is the one we'll refer to most today. And this is the most extreme type of insecure attachment. It's thought to be an outcome of the parent's experience of abuse or trauma in their own childhood. Studies have shown that about 20 to 40% of the population have some degree of disorganized attachment, and 80% of children who've been abused have probably a disorganized attachment with their parent. So this is the situation where the parent is both the stable anchor person, because children come into the world utterly dependent and needing a caregiver to survive. So the parent holds that position for the child as the one that the child would turn to for their dependency needs, for food, for shelter, for reassurance, for comfort, for safety. And the parent can be the actual perpetrator of fear and terror. So the parent can actually create terrifying experiences for the child, and the child soaks up the parent's fear and confusion, and it's a real fragmented sense of self. This is the parent who can't calm down when there's anger. Now, of course, you could have that experience and not have a disorganized attachment, but this is sort of one of the foundational elements for a child who grows up and becomes a parent who is deeply triggered by their own child's needs, demands, noise, chaos, drama, defiance, refusal to cooperate. So if you yourself had a disorganized attachment with your primary caregiver, it would make it more challenging for you to mentally just say, well, that was then, this is now. and I'm going to show up in a way that's loving and present and calm. That's a very unrealistic expectation without doing the work of healing, which is what this entire summit is about, which is such a beautiful, beautiful offering and opportunity, because we can heal. This is the thing. We don't have a life sentence. If you did not have a parent who was able to offer you secure attachment, you're still very much able to move into a place where the tendencies that the adaptations that you acquired through that kind of attachment with your parent, where not only were they the source of fear, terror, abuse, neglect, but they were still the only grown-up that you might turn to for comfort. So it's a very, very confusing experience to grow up with, and it can create some challenges as we ourselves are now parents. But you can change this. Attachment experiences from the past can be worked with. There's an amazing way that, because of neuroplasticity, where we can create new pathways, new synaptic connections through healthy, loving, and secure experiences, and thankfully heal. So history is not destiny. We are impacted by the type of attachment that we had. It perhaps can help someone contextualize why they show up in this almost Jekyll and Hyde way, so that they don't simply feel, ashamed. If we understand what's at the root of our behavior, it can reduce a lot of the guilt and the self-hatred and the harsh way that we address ourselves when we fall short of a hoped for expectation. But when we make sense of what happened, we can kind of rewrite some of the pathways and show up very differently. I have been a family therapist for 40 plus years and had many, many, many parents come to me who had just horrific experiences in their own childhood, and have watched these beautiful transformations occur in the context of therapy and healing and journaling and rewriting your narrative, coherent narrative. So there are a lot of things I'd like to introduce today about how we can facilitate this kind of healing. But it's a little bit of work. It's beautiful work. And so one of the ways I thought I would illustrate that is with a story, actually a fairly recent story that came to me from a client who had a session, who was had been struggling with the way she showed up with her son. And she was kind of appalled by the degree of reactivity that would appear for her when her child was defiant or resistant or explosive. And it might actually be a relatively small infraction that would catalyze this rage inside of her. And she attended a class that I did actually with Dr. Dan Siegel and Tina Bryson, where we started to talk about attachment models and began to do some reading and reflecting. What happened in her childhood was that her father and her brother, who was maybe about 13 years old, used to have very intense fights, violent fights. And this young girl at the time would go into her room and hide under the covers. The mother couldn't make it stop. The mother couldn't really reassure her. And of course, your father is supposed to be the one who protects you, who helps you feel safe and secure. So it's very, very scary when a child experiences a father or mother who is actually the source of their terror, which was the case for her. And she noted that her behavior was modeled after the avoidant model, where she would, when her child had a meltdown or a need, and she would want to pull away. She didn't know how to be comfortable addressing it. And so it would escalate, it would get louder and messier. And she could reflect once she started to think about this and be exposed to the idea of attachment and its influence on our behavior today in present time. So what would happen is that when her child would express a need or a demand, it would trigger this avoidant tendency, the one that she had been witness to in her own mother. Her mother didn't come to her aid or her defense or support when she was hiding under the covers. She just sort of pushed that off in the corner. And Sharon adopted the same strategy or adaptation when there was chaos in her own home with her son's needs. She avoided it. She stayed in a place of detachment. And noted too that when her son started to escalate, her heart would beat fast. She felt just a lot of tension, and as we reflected in an exercise later, which I'll come to. So she noted that the behavior escalated when her son expressed a need or a demand, and she would pull away in the same way that her own mother had detached and not come to her aid or support or talked about what was going on when the father and the brother were at fisticuffs. That this was a pattern that she inherited and that she was replicating in her own son's upbringing.